Well, good. Hello, everyone. As Lisa said, I'm Dennis Darby, President and CEO, and I'd like to welcome all of you to CME's English Language Town Hall for Election 2021. We are a few weeks into what will be one of the most significant elections in our life, I think, and the last 2 years have really upended, everything in our lives, in society, in our economy, how we do events like this. It is at this point in history that we're being asked to elect a new government. And for manufacturers, this is really a critical time. The pandemic reminded everyone about how important a strong domestic industry is. And despite our sector's long and very storied history and an integral part of Canada's story, there are major challenges that remain for us. Canadian manufacturers simply aren't as competitive as their global peers. We don't invest enough in technology and in machinery and equipment. We struggle to find workers of all types for all types of jobs. We export less as a global share of exports than we did even 20 years ago. And we're only at the very start of our industry's transition into its net zero future. So these challenges are really well known to us, and it's critical for whoever forms government to keep in mind the importance of working with industry to ensure that no company is left behind and to ensure that our approach to net zero is in sync with our key trading partners. So Canada can compete successfully. So we're really here to talk about solution. Now, over the weekend, you would have hoped, I hope you would have seen that CME launched our 2021 election platform, and we titled it Manufacturing Now. And in it, we are pointing to the urgent need to revitalize Canada's manufacturing sector. And we're calling on all parties to take what we're calling the 2% pledge. And what that means, well, every year around the OECD countries, so the large industrialized countries around the world, about $2.5 trillion is invested in global manufacturing. Canada's global goal should be to attract at least 2% of that every year. So that means about $50 billion should be invested into Canada's manufacturing sector to keep up with the rest of the world. The 2% pledge is a simple commitment to a goal that would dramatically revive our industry. And our election platform that we released is really our blueprint, how to get there. Now, there are more than 25 specific recommendations, but let me summarize it. There are really four key objectives. One is we need to get the workers we need. Two, we need to stimulate investment in innovation and advanced technologies. We need to, three, increase Canada's exports, our share and our absolute dollar value of exports. And four, we need to adopt an industrial net zero strategy that works. If we do all of this, we really believe that manufacturing will thrive again in Canada, provide millions of good paying jobs to Canadians, secure our prosperity, and prepare us for the next pandemic or whatever other challenges is thrown in front of us. So what I'm looking forward today in our town hall discussions with the parties is really a little bit about that and what their perspective is. I'd like to thank them, by the way, and I'm going to thank each of them as they come on. Before we begin, I want to make a short comment, and I'll make it every time. I want to thank our panelists for standing for public office, for putting themselves out there and their ideas in your respective writings. It's not for the faint of heart, and we are certainly better off when we have an honest and polite exchange of ideas. And we hope that events like this are the kind of thing that Canadians want to see and hear. Real exchanges, real ideas that we can then make our decisions as Canadians. Now, here's the thing. We asked for you in questions in advance, and we are going to go through those today. Now, most of you know Matt Poirier. He works at CME. Matt, if you have his email, if you think of a question during the talks by the various candidates, please feel to email him. But hopefully everyone walks away today with a sense for what is achievable with this 2% challenge. So our first guest, and he's on the screen here with me right now, Brian Massey. He's a candidate for the New Democratic Party. He's a member of Parliament for Windsor West. He's been an MP for Windsor for almost 20 years. Though he started as a child, he told me, so he obviously was a child candidate. And he's a longtime friend and supporter of CME. And I want to point out specifically, Brian, that the NDP platform calls for a creation of a new industrial and manufacturing strategy for Canada. And that is our number one task at CME. So it's good I don't have to press you on that one, but it's a pleasure to have you kick off the town hall. So maybe provide us with a few opening remarks to our audience. Tell us where you stand on the future of manufacturing, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Dennis, to do this. And I want to thank you and CME for all your work to do on a regular basis in Ottawa. I've been there, as you noted, almost 20 years. I come from a manufacturing town. In fact, I was a manufacturer myself. I worked in Chrysler Plant 3 and Plant 6. And as an employment specialist for persons with disabilities, I train people in all kinds of manufacturing facilities, from print to subassembly in the auto sector to even the pharmaceutical industry. So I've got all that training myself. And getting into politics really was an accident in many respects to myself, but it's been a privilege. And I've served just before Jack Layton, and then through this tenure here, and most of the time as industry critic, also international trade and transport critic. And I see the challenges of manufacturing in our country on a daily basis. I live them on the streets of Windsor and across the country. I've toured trying to get a manufacturing strategy in the past. I think the pandemic has shown what we've always advocated for as New Democrats, is this is part of our national security. It's been something that we've watched an erosion take place, not because of the capabilities of a country and the ingenuity of the manufacturing society, but when you see challenges that globally affect our competition and other countries getting ahead of us, we haven't had the proper responses. And I think that's really what we're talking about here, is getting into a further assertive approach on manufacturing. I've always said we need to go on the offense. We've often been on the defense, and look at Windsor here, where it's known as the big three in the past. We lost General Motors, and so really it's just the big two. And if we don't have some of the investments that are necessary for the future, we're going to miss out on incredible opportunities. So I'm really pleased with the platform you put forth. It actually has a lot of the footprints of things we've been talking and trying to get in Ottawa. I've been able to get committee studies in the past at industry committee, and some of them have been unanimously supported by other political parties. And we've had some work that's actually led to some real practical things to help manufacturing. But I have to tell you, the Prime Minister was disappointing when he was in London, Ontario, and said that we had to transition out of manufacturing. It comes from a place, I think, that sometimes the rest of the country gets poor messaging from the importance of manufacturing and the footprint for not only just in terms of keeping current jobs, but actually transitional technologies and also spillovers that we can do that are key. So I'm excited to be a part of this today. I think it's ironic because we really have a manufactured election right now, because we were all set to go back to Parliament in the next couple of weeks to work together as Canadians. But here we are. And I think as New Democrats, I think we've shown when you put us in the House of Commons and the footprint there, we have experienced and have been manufacturers, assemblers, and part of that through the process of getting to the House of Commons, and we make it work. And with Jagmeet Singh and the focus that we have is we want to make Parliament work better and stronger for Canadians, and manufacturing is really at the heart and core where we're at. And again, I want to say thank you for having the conviction to put forth a challenge to all the parties. And hopefully there'll be measurables after, because I can tell you, Ottawa can sometimes be a logic-free zone. And it's one of those things that we could all work better to get real results and measurables and transition to a new age economy, which is really key, especially with the challenges you put forth.
I'll make sure that I'll use that phrase, logic-free zone. I'll give you credit. But let's assuming logic rules. Let's talk a little bit then first, and thank you. First of all, manufacturers across Canada are starving for workers. It's a big problem, and and we need to attack it on a number of fronts. We need more immigrants, particularly in the economic class. We need to do more to enable companies to upskill and to reskill. We need to tap into the neglected segments of Canadian society. Where does your party stand on all of this, and where are some of the measures that you're proposing to help address our labor shortages and specifically the skills of our labor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of the things that we've seen, being an asset for contract negotiations to get reinvestment. And I'll point to our workforces here in Windsor and across Ontario and across Canada that often have great capabilities which keep investment in Canada, especially when it comes to retooling and making decisions about where to invest. It's always on the strength of the workers. In fact, I would point to Unifor, for example, where they're able to actually leverage investment as part of the collective agreements, and often associated by the fact that we have trained, skilled workforce that is actually very much an asset. That coupled with our healthcare system and other offsets that are important. The dollar fluctuates in some of those decision-making processes, but there's no doubt that our workplace is strong. So a couple of things that are really important is with regards to, I'll point to first is immigration. Right now, it's in a crisis. In my office, I have actually a dedicated person for immigration. So we have hundreds of people coming in every month. And so I have about a couple thousand cases that are still outstanding where they need to be processed. And those are people that sometimes they can't even get into the workforce right away. And then you have unsettled families that need to move on and move forward. And so those people are actually in our communities right now. So we're not even talking about going out to try to get somebody that might be pre-trained or pre-qualified or so forth. They're actually in our streets, in our neighborhoods. Children are attending our schools. Some of them are very much involved in the community that can't get the final chapter completed to get their citizenship. So that has to be cleared up immediately. In fact, most recently with the Afghanistan situation, the immigration office from the Liberals have said that don't call us about any other immigration case right now because we're all concentrating on Afghanistan, which we understand the crisis that's happening there. There's no doubt. And I'm glad that we're doing everything that we can to do the right thing to help people right now connected to our country who have done the right thing for us. But at the same time, these caseloads and these numbers have been there as long as I've been there. And a lot of that's about respecting a public service that can process those cases. And making sure that we have them there. I would also argue what's different for the NDP than the other parties is that we believe in family reunification. And family reunification is brothers, cousins, sisters. And sometimes we need to look towards those things because when you look at manufacturing in the past, we've often had families that have been generational manufacturers. They've been in the family unit that we see the transferable skills that take place not only just in the workforce, but at home as people come to the country and they get their actual extra training and support and their structures around them from the people that are already here as we reunite cousins and all kinds of different people that have this family supports necessary to be able to get up, go to a job, be productive, and they get the extra language training and skill sets. So I would argue that that's one of the underutilized aspects that we could do with our immigration model, because sometimes when you've seen in the past, when we don't recognize foreign credentials and we don't recognize other types of services, people come here and then they end up driving a cab or something else when they've actually been an engineer. And so those are things that we would also try to work towards improve with incentives and also proper education and training to ensure that they get those things. But in the meantime, we need to actually expedite the cases that we have here to get people back in the workplace because there's basically shortages happening right now. As well with regards to training programs to ensure that we're working better with the provinces. I come from the day and age, and I guess it's showing my age here, is that there used to be a national employment strategy to some degrees where we'd actually have Human Resources Development Canada, where we'd actually work on making sure there would be credentials recognized across the country. And there would also be a strategy that would be rolled out that was a little more assertive with the provinces and providing them the right tools and support. So I'm not suggesting we go back to that day, but we'd be more assertive in making sure that those programs and trainings are available and we actually get the results and measurables for them. So those are a couple of things that we would work on right away to make sure that things are taking place. And I think that our number one asset is still going to be our people. And you look at the multicultural aspect of Canada, our language skills and all those different elements can be coupled together to be an attractive element. But again, we have to actually invest in and have a supported public service to get them through the process, because if we don't have that element, then the work never gets done. And basically, paperwork sits on a shelf and a worker can't get to the job and fill a spot that's empty because basically it's held up by the lack of resources in Ottawa. And that's just not acceptable, because I know the public servants want to do the right thing too. But I can tell you, there's a reason why I have a person in my office doing 4 days a week of immigration and helping people to actually get through that process, because we want to get those people into jobs working on our economy, especially when there are shortages right now. It's crazy that I actually even have to do that.
It's really important, but it's really important, and we hope your colleagues across the country, because that's such an important piece. We have to utilize the people here in Canada. We need more, but we have to utilize it. So I really appreciate your comments. Now let's slight change in change of gears here. One of the things that manufacturers have to do is invest in technology and automation, to be more productive and to scale up, because scaling up is important. And we're competing with some of the most advanced economies in the world through our trade agreements. There are a number of government programs out there to help companies invest, but SMEs, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, struggle to qualify. How can we help, not the automotive guys, but the tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, for example? How do we help those companies invest in those critical technologies so they can improve their business?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually it's a really important one too, because what's sometimes forgotten is that OEMs have passed on a lot of costs to the smaller and medium-sized manufacturers over the last number of decades. I mean, as the numbers got crunched and as we tried to be more competitive, it often led to it being passed along down the system. And those are the companies that can't afford sometimes to have the lawyers, accountants, and specialized salespeople. I can tell you from tool and die mold making in this community here is that often those business owners are out there doing the hustling to get the new business. So when we have incentive programs, I think that they have to be related to payroll, things that are easy to deduct and actually to control, and they're actually easily accessible. So this way they don't have to be jumping through hoops. Or when you look at SR&ED tax credits, for example, many actually have a hired specialist to get the SR&ED tax credit because they don't have that expertise, and that costs them some of the actual tax credit they're supposed to get from the government. So we've actually created a cottage industry to allow those small manufacturers to actually get into the game. And that's unacceptable. I mean, how is it that you actually have to have hired hands and support to actually get access to government support programs? And you see some of the most innovation that's taken place on the smaller manufacturers that, end up being very frustrated because they're out working on their next contract to keep the plant going. They're hustling, and often it's been very difficult during COVID, and that's why I want a safe border task force so we can actually get some more sales out there to other countries to deal with it, because the work just won't happen without them doing it. So we really want to propose that. And also one of them really important is to have especially a single point of entry for all government programs and services. They can't be just looking on websites every single day for what the government might announce. And we've seen so many complicated programs, and we even saw under COVID, the way that the industry laid out the initial response for government procurements was very complicated. So we have to have a single point of entry that's also followed up and expectations to do so. And again, that requires a robust approach to being more assertive, as opposed to what's happening for government procurement. And for some of these programs, it's very defensive. We expect everybody to be able to know what's going on, how it's going on, how to apply, how to make sure the process is followed up, and so forth. I would argue that it's worth having a single point of entry with almost like a coaching process. And we should be measuring why aren't those businesses taking advantage of those compared to the larger employers, and then starting to adjust those programs, because the data will show that they haven't been able to do that. And again, it's simply because they're out hustling to get the next contract, the next job, and deciding what to do with their future.
Really, really good point. In fact, we've heard from small manufacturers as they look at the various support programs that they, it's about keeping the lights on and keeping production going. And a great idea. How do we make it easier? How do we reduce that? Both the burden, complexity, but also, exactly. I think you called it a coaching or a concierge service, some way to make sure that we're not leaving, that companies that don't have those resources have the real support. So I appreciate that. Related to that then is, it's funny because we know that we have, and we hear government talk about this of all stripes, how we have, unrivaled access to global markets through our great free trade agreements. Yet our percentage of global exports continues to shrink. Not quickly, but enough that we should be worried. And manufactured goods, for our members, they know this, is about 2/3 of what we export. How do we get companies to scale up? How do we get to export more? How do we take advantage? And from your party's point of view, how do we take advantage of all these global trade agreements?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the thing is that look at our trade agreements. And, we've often been criticized as Democrats because we've been critical of other countries on their environmental, their labor practices, and the way that they approach some of the businesses. And that's been seen as anti-trade. Whereas what we saw finally with NAFTA is at least the inclusion for the first time of environment and labor as part of it. And that was ironically forced on us by Mexico and the United States. We came and signed on it last. And we've often argued for that because those are subsidies that are used against Canadian manufacturers and workers. And so our trade agreements need to reflect that. And the number one thing that we can start to do on that is actually having more transparency in our trade deals that include the manufacturers themselves, and in a way that the negotiations take place can be more open so that there's pivoting. So what we do now is that when trade agreements happen, they go out and they do the consultation. Sometimes it's with the usual bunch and so forth. And then they go behind closed doors and that's the end of it. And then you get the sausage at the end of the day that's there. And then we all kind of pretend that it's going to work. And that's not really what should be taking place. What we should be doing is having the inclusion as part of the pivot process, as part of our negotiations. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The US has been doing that for years. We should be doing the same and laying out those expectations. And again, with the environment and with labor practices, they're a net advantage for us for trade. And that's how we can actually look at some of our procurement. We actually have countries that we compete against, including the United States. There's Buy America, there's Buy American. There's other countries that are doing massive investments. Auto is a classic one where there's state-owned enterprises from some of our major competitors. And meanwhile, we're so timid and afraid to use some of what we have for steel and for softwood lumber and for other types of natural advantages. It's just really out of sync with what's taking place out there. I don't want to be protectionism, but at the same time, I want a fair competition. And I think that's really what most Canadians want, is a fair competition. And so what we're proposing is to actually have more inclusiveness and fluidity with trade agreements, having the expectations ramped up in terms of the labor and environmental practices, and making sure that we have industrial strategies as part of that. So the United States, for example, does that with their military procurement and other types of procurement, even outside of Buy America and Buy American. And there's nothing wrong with us to have the same approach for those advantages, because it's also going to create transferable technology. And I'll conclude with this, is that part of it too is when we actually look at government procurement using public funds and expectations, we can also look at expectations on those that are manufacturing to do it in-house, but also to transferable technology as part of the shared agreement. So we build other manufacturers as a part of the process. So that's got to be a key component. We have to start using our inner circle as support strengths as we actually produce out there, because you look at the numbers, we're going down. We're going down even further. And you look at the recent investment, Mexico and the United States is going up. So in our trade agreement under NAFTA that we currently signed and we're going forward on, we're not going in the opposite direction of our partners. So we have to do something different.
So in your mind, if you look at that agreement, which we're not going to renegotiate, but what would you do directly to start to counteract it? Because I agree, we're not commercializing enough of the technologies here. We're not taking advantage of this. Well, is there something you guys would take? Here's what we might do first.
Yeah, I would start talking about a Buy Canada strategy as well too,
Okay,
for procurement as part of it. So that's part of a leveraging tool. And I was told this by Democrats. I'm vice chair of the Canada-US Parliamentary Association. So pre-COVID, I was in Washington quite a bit, and I'm still online with senators in Congress. And I've had so many of them tell me, why don't you have at least a Buy Canada component of your discussions, so that actually it's a leverage tool and to open up the door for some of that procurement. So that's one of the things that we can start to have a controllable. I'd also look at some of the progressive elements with regards to labor and environment, because they actually protect workers, they actually improve our health standards, and they also speak to the strengths of our country and make sure that they're more enforceable. So those are some of the things that I work on right away. And we, of course, still have issues over steel and softwood that continue to be part of our discussions and ongoing. But I wouldn't be afraid to continue to keep challenging those aspects. We've witnessed, and it's interesting, as a border person, and you even look at the border right now, we've been outmaneuvered by Mexico in the last number of years from this administration. There's no doubt about it, because the southern border with the United States and Mexico is now being treated the same as the northern border in Canada. And that's wrong. What we need to do is work on getting more assertive with our actual exclusions that we've had in the past, more assertive about our policies, and also making sure that they're actually getting transferable results. And so that, what I mean by that is that we're measuring where we're winning or losing in those aspects. But the first thing would be to strengthen those aspects and start to work towards a Buy Canada for our own procurement. Because if we don't do that, they're continuing down their path. Why wouldn't we put a counter chip on the table to be able to negotiate some type of leverage?
well, you'd have our support on that one. So let me go. As the last question for the formal set of questions here, and not least of, I didn't put it at the end on purpose. The topic of the environment is on the minds of everyone, and on the minds of manufacturers. Specifically, Brian, how do we transition our industrial capacity in Canada to that net zero future? Big companies, they have the resources to do the work. It's harder for SMEs, who are the majority of manufacturers. How do we help all manufacturers make this transition early, so that we can be world leaders? We want to compete, but as you said, we want to lead. So what have you been thinking about that transition, and how to bring everybody along?
Yeah, well, this actually is a great thing, because manufacturing is so diverse. I mean, I used auto, but there's so many different aspects of manufacturing, and there's so many created opportunities. And we can actually, I have confidence we can actually rebuild some of the sectors that have been losing in the past. And that's why we really believe in sectoral strategies and measurements for them. So we would isolate them separately than that, put the funds aside with regards to it for the clean energy economy, and also create a committee of cabinet as well too, to make sure that when we look at our climate change adjustments, they're actually going to be done as a holistic sense that continues through the process. And that puts expectations then on the Minister of Industry and others to actually make sure that each sector is actually being treated correctly. And because you're right, when you start looking at some of the different sectors, they have different unique challenges. But we shouldn't be abandoning them on their own. So that's one of the reasons we go with the sectoral strategy. We'd also keep with the current situation where we actually have subsidies for workers, for hires and rehires. We keep that in place during the pandemic now. It's a key component to make sure that as we start to transition, there's not more destabilization. So we keep them in place. And again, the controllables over like the payroll stuff that we do for incentives there makes it easier for small and medium-sized businesses to get some type of asset coming in that's related to their hiring practices. That doesn't require accountants, lawyers, and specialists to actually try to navigate that. So we would continue to do that through climate change. And as well, too, I would argue that when we're looking at, say, for example, the patents and the types of things that we lose out of the innovation out of this country, higher incentives to keep that in this country for manufacturing and go heavy on those aspects, especially the transition period here for any types of incentives and types of job-related numbers that we would actually have for those small and medium-sized businesses, and even some of the larger ones, of course, too. We don't want to leave them out, but the focus has got to be on the small, medium ones and making sure that they can access those things. But the Committee of Cabinet for Climate Change puts greater expectations on the Cabinet and again to the Minister of Industry to be able to actually follow up with real hard numbers, because the hard numbers right now that we have are not good, but there's no plan other than just to kind of like sigh and say, well, that's unfortunate.
Well, thank you very much for saying that, because exactly one of our main thrusts in the work we're doing is how to make sure that we have targets and measurables that make sense for the various sectors so that they can compete, so that people know where the goalposts are changing, and it's not just one for everybody. I think that's very well said, Brian, and exactly what we needed to hear. You know what? Regrettably, and we could go on, but regrettably, we're at the end of our first segment. First of all, Brian, incredible insights, and again, thank you so much. It was lovely to speak with someone who's knowledgeable of our industry, and all I can say is good luck out on the hustings. I know this is, and again, thank you for taking time from your campaign. We wish you every success and have a great day. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for having me, and I appreciate you doing this. And you have our commitment from Jagmeet Singh and the NDP to make sure that the workplace floor and also the businesses and the investors are all well represented in an actual strategy that's measurable. That's the key. We need measurables. We won't know where we're going if we don't have measurables.
Well, to a manufacturer, that's music to our ears. Thank you very much, Brian. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm looking on my screen here. I think we're getting very close. Thank you, Brian. I think we're pretty well close to there's our next guest. Our next guest, hello, is the Honorable Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Great to be with you.
Well, I'm glad you're here. We've been talking about manufacturing, and so we're going to do a little bit of an introduction for you. We have people across from across Canada on the line today. So let me give some background for those of you who might be don't know Mr. Poilievre. First of all, 6-term member of Parliament for the riding of Carleton in Ottawa. He served in the cabinet of Prime Minister Harper and is currently the Shadow Minister for Jobs and Industry. You're no stranger to CME or our sector, and so we're so happy to have you as a guest in our town hall today. Welcome back to CME.
Good to be with you.
Now, so I'd like, as I've asked the other mayor, I'd like to maybe have you provide a few remarks to our audience of where you stand on the future of manufacturing. We see an awful lot in the Conservative platform on industrial policy, which of course we love to see that. But maybe you can touch on some of those highlights, and then I'll go through some of the questions that our members have asked. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me start with the problem, and then I'll go to the solution. The problem is that we're spending more and making less. Increasingly, Canada's become a hostile place to make things. We have a high degree of regulation, interprovincial trade barriers, high taxes on investment, high input taxes on payroll and energy, subsidies to wind and solar power in Ontario, which have driven up electricity prices and driven businesses out of this country. a patent regime that punishes new inventions and drives them into foreign hands. And the results are clear. Our people are making less than our counterparts. Money is leaving the country. According to David Dodge, former governor of the Bank of Canada, Canadians have $800 billion more invested abroad than the rest of the world has invested in Canada. Well, why is that? The answer is simple. We're not a great place to make money. We're a great place to take money, but not a great place to make money. And therefore, when Canadians invest in mutual funds or pension funds, the fund managers take the cash and they put it somewhere else where it can grow, because they know it can't grow here. We can't get our oil and gas to our own people. We can't mine the rare earths necessary to make electric cars or solar panels. And yet we claim to want to do something for the environment. Well, that is the fundamental problem, is that we have too much government blocking the productive forces of our economy. We have become a credit card economy. We borrow from the world to buy from China. China gets the investment and the jobs, we get the debt. Right now, we have $4 of debt for every $1 of GDP. The highest ratio on record, twice the historic average, up 1/3 in just the last 5 years. And when interest rates rise, there will be a debt crisis unless we've significantly reduced that debt ratio before it happens. So what's the solution? One, we need to reduce the tax rate on new investment. Conservatives will eliminate the carbon tax and allow companies that emit to reinvest the carbon costs back into greening their own operations instead of paying taxes to the government. That will create more efficiencies in the company and more jobs in Canada. Two, we will bring in a flow-through share tax advantage for investments in new pre-commercial technology, the same kind of flow-through shares that exist in the mining sector and have been so successful in flooding mining exploration with new risk capital. We'll extend that model to new technology. And when new patented technologies are invented, we will not have them sold off to foreign jurisdictions. Rather, we will make it attractive to keep them here. The problem right now with patents is that we subsidize their creation. Think of all the grants and subsidies and loans the government gave to BlackBerry and Nortel. But ultimately, that intellectual property was all sold off to low tax foreign jurisdictions. So we get the money losing phase of technology companies, and other countries get the money making phase. Why? Because they have lower taxes. Oh, here in Canada, the Conservatives will reduce the tax rate on income from new patented technologies like medications and other technological breakthroughs. We'll knock down interprovincial trade barriers so that it's easier for Canadians to move goods and services across boundaries. We'll speed up the recognition, work with provinces to speed up the recognition of foreign credentials for the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who come here with trade and professional designations that they currently cannot use because of lack of occupational licensing. We will reduce the regulatory red tape burden by bringing in we're strongly enforcing the 1-for-1 rule. Every new regulation, they have to get rid of an old one. We will simplify the tax system to reward work savings and investment. We'll speed up approvals for mines, pipelines, and other major economic infrastructure. We'll make it a crime for protesters to block economic infrastructure in protests. We will do all of these things to make this the fastest and easiest place on earth in which to build, to trade, to do commerce, to hire, to get things done. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, Pierre, thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments, and so much of that are the topics that we talk about all the time. And you're absolutely correct. We've had in our sector alone, we've seen our sector invest more in the U.S. for example, than they are here over the last number of years. Now, I want to talk, and you mentioned a number of things. One of them that's really close to manufacturers. related to the tax system. And I know you talk about changes. We've been calling for a Royal Commission on tax reform for years. In addition to fixing things like our incentive programs like SHRED. The SHRED program, of course, as you know, was originally intended as a way to try to help companies underwrite the commercialization of technologies. It's turned into, if you ask any manufacturer, an administrative nightmare. Can you be a little bit specific? What would you do especially for SHRED in terms of how would you reform that? Because it's obviously a sticking point for so many manufacturers.
Simplify the application process and ban companies from using from selling SHRED financed IP to foreign jurisdictions. We have to stop subsidizing the creation of technology that's sold off to foreign buyers. We don't get anything for that.
Yeah,
If we spend the money, it doesn't matter if it's the greatest breakthrough of all time. If we spend the money to invent it in Canada, but then it just goes to some other country when it becomes profitable, what have we gained? Nothing. We get the cost, they get the benefit. So the two things that need to happen are instead of these clunky bureaucratic programs where bureaucrats and politicians who have no skin in the game direct public funds towards R&D, what we should do is bring in a flow-through share model, as I mentioned, which advantages private individuals who invest in pre-commercial technology, both for the development and commercialization of it. That way their own money is on the line. People are investing their own cash, and the money will therefore have market discipline. It will go to things that are promising rather than things that are politically successful, politically sexy. And finally, we'll lower taxes on patent income. Because right now, again, you take a SHRED grant, you invent something, you sell it off to a foreign jurisdiction, we get nothing. Why would you sell it to a foreign jurisdiction? Well, easy, because in Switzerland, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and much of the United States, you get far more after-tax income for it. So let's make Canada the best place to earn patent income with a patent box that lowers the tax on that income.
Well, thank you very much. We've spoken about that before, and I'm really pleased to hear it. But let me go through some of the issues that were in our platform. Manufacturers, as you know, are some of Canada's largest exporters. We're about 2/3 of all exports, but our performance, as I think you alluded to, have been declining. And often small companies struggle to find a way to get onto the world stage. How would the Conservatives help remedy this? Clearly, our manufacturing exporters need to scale up. But is there room also for government trade agencies to do more? What are your thoughts on trying to find a way to regrow those exports, especially from the large number of small and medium-sized companies?
Well, we just have to make this the best place on earth in which to do business, make it more affordable to produce things here in Canada, and therefore win the competition battle. Yeah, you can create a bunch of new bureaucracies and trade offices around the world. To be honest, I haven't seen any evidence it works. Our lobbyists like it because it gives them something to do, gives them something to some billable hours. I look, the most successful trading jurisdiction on earth, Singapore. Mm-hmm. They have none of that. Their trade is something like 3 times the size of their GDP. They need trade to survive. Of course, they're a trading post. They have to import their own water. And yet they don't have all these monstrous international trade bureaucracies. Frankly, these bureaucracies have no incentive to perform. They hold a lot of meetings. They rent a lot of office space. They do a lot of talking. They produce a lot of PowerPoint presentations. Frankly, if they were doing anything productive, they wouldn't need to be funded by the government. They would be funded by the industries that are benefiting from them. So I think we need to do, instead of adding new bureaucracies here and around the world, is simply make this the most an advantageous place to build stuff again, so we can beat the competition.
Well, thank you, and let me change gears a little bit, but it's related to what you said. So disruptions tend to be a big issue for our sector. Disruptions on our transportation and trade networks, labor disruptions like at the Port of Montreal that are beyond our control and port bottom lines. You've seen issues with disruptions to the flow of immigrants into Canada during the pandemic that affect our labor pool. What are your thoughts on how Conservatives would help avoid these disruptions to help our Canada's industrial heartland do what it does best, which is produce the goods and services that we need to export.
We got to get the gatekeepers out of the way.
Go ahead.
That's the problem. We become a gatekeeper economy where small privileged bureaucratic groups use government to shut out competition, shut out newcomers, and live parasitically off of everyone else. We see that again and again in our economy. It's the reason we have so many interprovincial trade barriers. It's the reason we can't get natural resource projects built. It's the reason why immigrants who are highly qualified and skilled are prevented from working in their professions and trades. We see it with the rail blockades that tried to stop the Coastal GasLink from going ahead, even though it was supported unanimously by all the elected First Nations communities along the path. Basically, we see again and again these gatekeepers standing in the way. We need to remove the gatekeepers. It will take some political backbone to stand up to the self-interested groups that prevent development from going ahead.
Well, if you're lucky, what would you be the first step? Because we haven't started talking about net zero yet, but in an environment with our trade partners, what would be the first thing that the Conservatives would want to take on to help, as you said, to restart or to reignite this sector, if you could, and assuming success?
Well, there's a whole bunch of different things. I mean, for one, we need to ban people from blocking economic infrastructure.
Okay.
We saw, for example, when the protesters stood up again and fought against the Coastal GasLink. Here's a project that is going to pay billions of dollars of benefits to 20 First Nations communities, all of whom support the pipeline that will ship clean, green Canadian natural gas to Asia to displace dirty foreign coal. And yet these road and rail blockades stood in the way and sent a signal around the world that Canada is not a welcoming place to get things built. So we will ban people from blocking economic infrastructure. That's one example. Mm-hmm. Second, as I said, we need to reform and simplify our tax system to reward investment and production. And third, we need to cut regulatory red tape to make this the easiest place on earth to get things built. Let me give you an example. According to the OECD, we are ranked 36 out of 37 nations for the amount of time it takes to get a building permit for a warehouse. 36 out of 37 OECD nations. That's how bad we are just to get a warehouse built. Well, you can't get a warehouse. You can't have a distribution center for Canadian manufactured goods. You can't, you can't house a factory. You can't do any of the basic economic infrastructure activities that are necessary to create jobs and wealth. So we should be the fastest place in the OECD to get a building permit for a warehouse or a factory. And that's something that Conservatives will incentivize.
Well, so, and as you know, as any manufacturer will tell you, it's part of our complexity, as you mentioned, is because they tend to deal with 3 levels of government on exactly that, that particular item, whether it's a factory or a warehouse. How would you work with those other levels? Because it's going to take all hands on deck.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to be much more blunt with the municipalities. Let's take housing, for example. Right now, Canada has among the highest governmental costs baked into housing prices. In Vancouver, for example, the average house price has $600,000 of government baked into it. Delays, development charges, taxes, uncertainty. We, as Conservatives, will put a link between infrastructure grants for the municipalities and the speed of approvals for new housing, and also require massive housing densification around new transit stations so we can maximize the use of those stations. We should do the same thing to incentivize faster building permits for economic projects like factories, warehouses, plants, business parks, etc., so that our municipalities speed up and get out of the way and let our builders build.
Well, thank you. It's a great example. Now, well, we've been talking. A couple of questions have come in. So if you would indulge me for a minute, I have a question that has come in, if that's okay.
Please.
So maybe last, maybe not last, the topic of the environment is on the minds of many of our manufacturers. In fact, it's something that they, if you ask, among other things that are keeping them up at night, and really this idea, how do we transition our industrial capacity to our net zero future? And, and we know that big companies often have the resources, but it's harder for small companies. How do we approach this? How do we help manufacturers make this transition? Because we, as you said, we want to be the place that people want to do business. So how do we help those smaller companies get to that net zero future, which is something, we think all of our trading partners have made that commitment?
Well, instead of paying a carbon tax to the government, businesses should be able to keep the carbon that they pay into their own green fund, so that they can green their operations. And that's what Conservatives propose: get rid of the industrial carbon tax and let the companies keep that money and use it for greening their operations. So it would basically set up a regulatory green fund. You pay into it and you pull out to use the company would pay into its own green fund and pull out that money to green their operations and become more energy efficient. That way the cash stays with the business, is reinvested creating jobs rather than paying off the federal government and killing jobs in the process.
Okay, so it's okay. That's an interesting approach. Wow, you covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else you want to add before we let you go? Because you've covered an awful lot. You know how important it is. I think. Oh, maybe one question. Oh, I have one last question. Sorry to be a pain, but since I've got you, yeah, the issue is around labor and how do we get more people into the sector? Because one of the things that our manufacturing platform is, one of our biggest problems is finding people. We've talked an awful lot about the infrastructure, about how to how to go to net zero, but how do we get more people into our sector? Because we certainly need them.
Well, that's a good question. I think maybe you have to pay higher wages.
Oh, I think okay.
That's an idea. But in addition to that, we need to reorient our education system to encourage youth to take on the trades. Often our high schools just encourage every kid to go to university, even though they're higher paying jobs with less student debt in the red seal trades and in other blue collar occupations. So I think we need to our university and post-secondary finance governments provide should encourage more practical vocational training and less impractical theoretical study. So I think we did that, we'd have more skilled labor to go and earn the big paychecks that your companies are paying.
Well, and again, and not to put too fine a point, manufacturing pays about double the average, the average wage, the industrial wage, but it's true. And now this is another one where, Minister, where you basically got a situation where this is not entirely in the federal government's control. It's obviously a negotiation with the provinces. So we're interested in how you do exactly that. How do we get that emphasis? Make sure that the funding and support is more equally spread for those, for what we call the skilled trades or the red seal trades.
Well, look, Conservatives have always supported a parity of esteem or fair treatment for the trades vis-a-vis the professions. We are the ones that created the apprenticeship loan and the apprenticeship grant. We're going to bring in a tax credit for bringing on new apprenticeships. We're going to speed up. We're going to work with provinces to speed up the recognition of foreign credentials, not just in the professions, but also in the trades. And I give you one example. We just had the head of the Aviation Association at the Industry Committee. He had a guy immigrate from Germany to Canada. He was working for Lufthansa as a airplane mechanic. Because they're part of the Star Alliance, this guy was actually fixing Air Canada planes in Munich. Comes to Canada, and guess what? He can't work on planes because he can't get his license as an aviation mechanic, even though he was working on the exact same planes and they weren't falling out of the sky in Germany. So he comes here, he's got the skills, he's been doing it for years. We won't let him work. So the poor guy's probably making a low wage in a low skill job, even though he brings incredible abilities. And we've got to pressure our provinces to require quick recognition of foreign credentials for qualified people who come to this country.
Well, that's an incredibly vivid example of what we hear from manufacturers all the time. You know, the law, apparently the laws of physics work no matter where you are. So it should make that much difference.
Who knew?
Yeah, who knew? Last question, and because you've been such a good sport so far, I appreciate this. Can you talk to us about childcare and how you see that? And I'll tell you why. Because what we saw out of the pandemic were that as the pandemic struck, it was more women than men who stayed home, who didn't come back to work, and we're worried about the fact that some called it a she session. But at the end of the day, how do you see childcare fitting in to the conversation you and I just had around getting more people into the sector?
Well, we propose to give parents an extra $4,000 tax break to cover the cost of childcare. And that's the proven successful way to do it. Nobody has been able to explain how childcare will become more affordable if government takes it over. Nobody's been able to explain that. So the Liberal plan is to take money from parents, give it to the federal government, which gives it to the provincial government, which gives it to the municipal government, which gives it to a childcare agency, which then supposedly is going to provide a childcare space for those parents. Why not give the money to the parents and let them choose their own childcare? You have many engineers in your field. They would understand that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. How is it possibly more affordable for our country to funnel our childcare dollars from the parents through 3 levels of government and then back to the parents? Why not just give the money to the parents and let them choose their own option?
Well, thank you. And so we all agree that we need to make sure that we have those supports, because that's the way we're going to get higher participation and how we're going to keep women into the sector. And we agree. And we appreciate your perspective. Pierre, I
would also point out, though, that in Quebec, where they have this government-run daycare program, there's 50,000 kids on the wait list, and they have the highest income tax in North America to pay for government programs like that, driving business out of the province. So, I think the idea that the government should take over this, it'd be like saying, well, food is really important, therefore the government should take over all farming and grocery stores. I think we'd all starve. And so, something must be done. This is something, therefore we must do it. Logic is often flawed, and in this case, especially so. We believe in a real solution, which is to give parents the money and give them the choice, rather than having governments dictate to them.
I think that's we appreciate that sentiment. We all want it. We want more people participating. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a more efficient way. So I really appreciate that. Is there something? We'll give you the floor if you want to make any other comments you want to make to the manufacturing community across Canada. The floor is yours for some closing comments, and then we'll thank you.
No, it's time that the problem again is we're spending more and making less. Obviously, we had to spend in the pandemic, but as things get back to normal, government spending should too, because we have the biggest deficit in the G20. We're on track to have 50 more years of deficits under the Trudeau plan. And we have the second highest unemployment in the G7. It's not working. Our economy is held back by gatekeepers and very powerful parasitical interest groups that serve themselves at the expense of others, that make themselves rich by making others poorer. We need to unleash the power of bottom-up free market economics to empower workers and entrepreneurs. We need to move from corporate welfare to lower taxes, from government control to competition,
Mhm.
and from a credit card economy to a paycheck economy. That's what conservatives are fighting for, and it's how we'll secure the future.
Well, thank you very, very much. We we appreciated your comments and your ideas. We can only wish you the best on the rest of your campaign, and wish
Thank
you
you.
success. And it was lovely speaking with you. Thank you so much. Have a great rest
Okay.
of the day. Bye now.
You too. Bye now.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you to our first two speakers. We're back now. Now we have, I think we're pretty close. I think I see on my screen our last, but not least, guest for today is signing on very, very shortly. So I'll just wait a second till I see them on the screen. We've had two very, very engaged speakers on talking about their plans for manufacturing. As I said earlier at the beginning today, we released our platform asks on the weekend. Really, 4 key objectives. We're asking any prospective government. One is get the workers we need, to stimulate new investment, to increase our share of exports and our absolute value of exports, and adopt a net zero strategy. So it's really those 4 big pillars, and that's what we're going to ask our next guest. So I will wait just a moment, because I think I see the Honorable Francois Philippe Champagne, that he is on my screen. So we'll just wait a moment when he and his office are ready, we'll begin. And thank you all so far for sticking with us through the first 2/3 of our session today. So I'm going to double check to make sure that we're almost there. It looks like, yeah, it looks like we're just on the way. I also recommend everyone, you would have to go on our website. We have an election page, a campaign page, and you will see the details of the 25 plus recommendations in our election platform, and you'll see some of the background materials that we prepared over the last, through the pandemic, but as we walked into this new election, the things that we need as manufacturers. You've heard from some of our speakers already today, the importance of improving our exports, the importance of getting the people we need, of making things easier to build and invest in Canada, and to make sure it's easier to get the people who are here trained and ready to work, but also to bring more people in so they can contribute to this growth. So I will just take a 10-second break here while we wait for, I see that the minister's office is just connecting now. So hang on a second. While we're waiting, I want to remind everybody that we have a second town hall, this time in French, on Wednesday. And I think it's really important that we talk a little bit about this. Wednesday at noon, the session will be similar today. It will be hosted by my colleague, Véronique Proulx, our Senior Vice President for Quebec. She will do an excellent job, much better than I could ever do in French, as all of you know who've been listening to me for the last few years. But we will have a Minister, Mélanie Joly. We'll have from the Conservative Party, Vincent Duhamel. From Brome, from the Bloc Québécois, Gabriel Saint-Marie. And from the NDP, Benoit Bourassa. So we're going to have a great session in French, but that doesn't take away. We're going to have a great session right now, because I see my friend and our minister. Good afternoon, Minister. Nice of you to take time out of your campaign today. Hello.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and it's good to be with you and all the members. It's like a homecoming for me.
Right.
To be with you. Obviously I have to campaign for a few days, but trust me, where my heart is. I've been calling CEOs across the nation to make sure that things continue to progress as we are going to this election. But I just want to say thank you, if I may say, and it's just a word of gratitude to you and to the members, the thousands of members, and I would say more than 1 million people you represent, for stepping up during the COVID crisis. You know that you had Canadians back, retooling, reinventing. I visited so many floors where people were producing PPE, ventilators. And I just want to say how proud I am of what you've done to raise your hand, be there for Canadians. And now it's our turn to have your back as we move forward. So I just wanted to say that out of the start, because I don't think we have said it enough to thank all the manufacturing sector for being there for Canada and being a key component of our future recovery. So just out of the start, Dennis, just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister. And yes, it's for our colleagues across Canada. Minister Champagne is our Minister of Innovation, Science, and Industry, and he's been a longtime supporter of CME and has worked with us over the years. And yes, we've seen substantial investments in Canada's industrial capacity, and they've been obviously welcomed by the sector, especially through the pandemic. And so it's really a pleasure. I'm going to get you to say a couple opening remarks. Really, this is the question: is that a manufacturing strategy part of the plans if you're reelected? And if this plan can have a goal of attracting at least 2% of the world's manufacturing investment dollars to Canada, we're interested to see what your thoughts are, how we're going to achieve that. So I'll give the floor to you, Minister, and then I'll ask you a few prepared questions.
Well, thank you, Dennis, again. And I must say, I'm a man who believes in vision with action. The vision is clearly there in order to rebuild the manufacturing sector. I think the accomplishment speaks for themselves. You've seen us, for example, just look at the biomanufacturing sector. You may recall when I started, people were saying, Minister, we've seen a decline of 40 years. And I think in a couple of months, we've been able to turn that around and having significant investments from Sanofi. We've seen Novavax choosing to come. And one which I'm very proud to ensure the safety, the health and safety of Canadians for decades to come is Moderna, that not only chose to be, Canada is the only G7 nation where they decided to set a factory, but in addition to that, building a center of excellence and a research and development center. And why I'm so proud, Dennis, is because this is going to have rippling effect throughout the industry, because these kind of anchor investments, come with a lot of R&D spending. And one of the things we've been able to negotiate was to make sure that there would be a lot of domestic sourcing. I'm a big believer in Made in Canada. We've seen, as former Foreign Affairs Minister, we've seen global supply chain becoming more regional, more emphasis on resiliency than efficiency. And I think Canada can certainly play a big role in that. You've seen it in the aerospace sector. You've seen it with electric vehicle, with the GM, the Ford, Novabus, and all of that. When we did these programs, we made sure that SMEs would be part of the journey. You may have seen when we did aerospace, we've set aside $500 million with my colleague, Minister Joly, to make sure that SMEs could really benefit from these anchor investments, facilitating, for example, training, digitization, because we know that the world's going to be more digital. So how can we help our SMEs together? So I love the 2% challenge. I read everything you put on the website, trust me, and I love it because to me, it looks achievable. You know me, I used to be on your sales force as trade ministers to attract investment. I think we have a good track record. I must say, the election came, but my next big thing is around the battery ecosystem. You may have seen the space economy. There's a lot of good things where we can position Canada for the future. And my discussion with your members is always to look not 2-3 years ahead, but 20 to 30 years ahead. So making taking strategic action now, but with a long-term vision. And aerospace is a good example, because when I went to CEOs, I said, don't tell me just about the square footage you need, but where's going to be the industry 20 years from now? And they said it's hybrid propulsion, it's electric helicopters. So how can we be getting the mandates that will secure investments for the next 20, 30, 40 years? That has been certainly the vision coupled with action, because there's never been a better time to invest, and I must say, to be a Canadian manufacturer.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much, and I really appreciate the commitment, because helping SMEs take advantage of those programs, take advantage of those growth opportunities is a constant challenge. So it's something we encourage to make sure that we continue to do that. Big companies have the resources, they have the infrastructure. How do we make sure those small medium-sized companies can take advantage of the programs and invest in that machinery and equipment and technology so that we are, like you said, competitive for the next 30 years or more. So it's
Dennis,
really
I get it because, I spent 20 years of my life in Europe, as you know, in some multinational, but I learned the rope with my dad and then in a family business. So I've known a company of 1.5. I probably was the half, and I've seen big companies. So I must say that I'm very cognizant and calling you from Shawinigan. Trust me, a town with an industrial background. And sometimes, again, if I may say, just the aerospace sector, this is not just about big urban centers. Some of the largest SMEs in my own writing are in the aerospace sector. They're making the doors, they're making the interiors of some of these jets and helicopters. So, and I see that throughout the country. So definitely, we need to have some anchor investors, but we need to make sure that our SMEs and greening the whole supply chain. I'll come back to that later.
Well, in fact, that's a good transition, and I'll change a little bit. So the main drive in much of your government investment in companies is behind the net zero transition, and I'm sure you would agree we're at the very, very beginning of this. But how do we ensure all manufacturers get included in this transition? We don't leave anybody behind. And can the government have broadly accessible programs or systems to allow all sizes of companies? Because what we hear from manufacturers is, especially those that are maybe not in the heart of the center of some of the big, the big emitters and big initiatives. How do I make sure that I'm successful going to net zero and being competitive? So talk a little bit about how to bring all the companies along.
Well, first of all, I'm happy you asked the question, Dennis, because I think that's the opportunity of the century. I think we can be a global leader in greening supply chain across the world. And that includes SMEs, clean tech, green tech. I think we could be the supplier of green technology to the rest of the world. I mean, climate change is a global challenge we all need to tackle. But your focus on SME is the right one. I mean, we know that 98% of employment in the country is small and medium-sized businesses. So what we've done was to make sure a program like STDC, Sustainable Development Technology of Canada, which I'm sure you know, and the people with us know well because they've been doing great work and supporting early stage smaller companies to come with green innovation. We've put almost $1 billion in that entity. We recapitalized by $750 million to make sure that we could be there at a critical time, because we reached a tipping point now. I mean, the green technology, the green companies, the green product, that's what the markets demand. That's what consumers are looking for. And that's what we're supporting. Now, the Strategic Innovation Fund, you may have seen, Dennis, also, I often say, look at where people put their money and you'll see what's their vision. Well, we put $8 billion in greening our economy, because we understand that that's the best way to secure the job of today and making sure we'll be there in the industry of tomorrow. So certainly these kind of programs that we've been put in place, IRAP, STDC, what we've done with the Strategic Innovation Fund, and I crisscross the country, as you know, Dennis, talking to your members. And I think what we've been trying to do is to support people across the value chain. I'm a huge believer. I mean, we've seen with electric vehicle, we've been able to attract the GM of the world, the Ford. But again, we've been able to attract also significant investment by smaller companies. Just look at Lions Electric. Just look at Novabus. Just look at Taiga. Taiga, it's three guys that I've met once, which decided that they could green, snowmobile. And here they go. They raised capital on the market, and now they're building a factory, startup kind of. So we've been there across the sector because we believe that the future is a green future. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. We've been blessed by geography. We've been blessed by natural resources. We've been blessed by talent. And that's one of the big things, Dennis. We need together. And I'm saying that because I think we need to do it together. We need to nurture talent, because we know that it's talent, know-how, expertise that attract investment. Investment is coming because there's talent. I can assure you, when I did that with Moderna, when we did that with the blue hydrogen in Edmonton, the reason people are coming with investment, very significant investment, is because we have the talent here in our country.
And on that point, Minister, as you've been probably hearing in your own writing, but we're here from our manufacturers across the country. They're all having difficulty finding workers, of all levels of skills. And this is actually right now, this, is holding us back. And we offer high-paying jobs relative to other sectors. So, what would be your plan to increase the number of workers available? Is an increase in immigration part of it? Is the program to increase temporary foreign workers like you've done in Quebec? Is that part of it? What would be your plan to get more people, into the industrial sector, into our workforce, and how to get more skills? Those are the two things: skills and people. So tell us a little bit about your plans.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, we've seen labor shortage, as you know, Dennis, before the pandemic. Often people talk to me about that, and I said, listen, this is a phenomenon that we had seen before the pandemic, and which is also true in most OECD countries, because, aging population, challenge around labor is becoming more prevalent in most economies. Now, that's why we took action already before the pandemic, because you're quite right. I mean, I see entrepreneurs and I see small business that say, Minister, I just met someone yesterday that said, Minister, we delayed an order of 1,000 charging station because we're not quite sure if we can deliver. And, we are trustworthy to our customer in the United States. We don't want to take any chance. So the first thing is around skills. And I'm happy you said it, Dennis, because, I spent time in Europe, and as you know, there is a better match between industry and schools and universities and colleges to make sure that people would have training on the job, kind of the first job to make sure people get interested. And I think in Canada, one of the golden nugget we have is MyTax, which many would know, which we've been training tens of thousands of young people in industry to learn and to adopt the industry of the future. Because I believe that the manufacturing sector, if you look at the history of the world, countries which have prospered have a strong manufacturing sector. It was true during the pandemic. That's how we got through it, to PPE and other things you did. It's true today, and it's going to be true tomorrow. So strong manufacturing sector, we need skills. Some are talking about upskilling. Some are talking about reskilling, because clearly, you go on a factory floor today, it's nothing like 20 years ago. You need digital skills because there's automation, there's artificial intelligence coming, quantum, probably computing at some places, robots. So you need a broader set of skills. I'm always amazed when I go in a machine shop and I look at the instrument and I try to imagine how would I program that machine, far more complex than the GPS that I'm trying to muster in my own car, trying to think, it's full of technology, it's full of digital tools, but that's the future if we want to be competitive and we want to be productive.
And
The other pillar to me is immigration. And there's no doubt that immigration, leaving, I would say COVID aside, we're on track for 400,000 immigrants in our country. And just to put that in perspective, Dennis, this is the last time we welcomed so many people, you have to go back to the 1900s. You have to go back to the last century to see that we had so many people coming. And we're on track because, yes, we need skilled labor. We need these people to fill the jobs in the manufacturing sector. The third pillar, and you mentioned Quebec, is temporary foreign workers, which are providing an essential complement to the workforce in our country. It's true in the agricultural sector, but it's true in other sectors. And to that, I was proud that we could reach an agreement, which I'm sure you're aware, Dennis, with the government of Quebec. And I've been pushing for that because we raised the 10 to 20%. And that is providing immediate relief because the people you represent were saying, Minister, we're with you. We understand the vision. We understand what we're trying to do, but we need them now, because that's now that we need them if we want to go to the manufacturing season. And so I think that is a model which is providing relief and more people coming into the workforce. But I think with you, Dennis, we'll need to have a national discussion on that because we need to bring colleges, we need to bring provinces, we need to bring the federal government, we need to bring industry because this is a challenge that we can only tackle together. If we want to have the workforce of the future for today, but the next 20 years, we need to take a holistic approach. And I'm quite committed to sit with you and the industry and colleges, all of them with whom we're dealing with already, to try to have a vision for the future to make sure that labor is not an impediment, but is a competitive advantage, just like AI is and quantum. We know that talent would be the scarce resources as we go forward. So how do we nurture that resources and attract more people to our country?
Well, thank you for saying that, and I think you and I would be in trouble if we had to go work in that machine shop. By the way, so good thing we have other jobs. But at the end of the day, no, you're absolutely correct. And I was going to comment on that. I said this is not just something the federal government can do. You're going to have to work with the other levels in order to make sure that as we bring these people in, we get them where they need to get to. What about looking at, recognizing their credentials in some cases? How do we make sure that this rolls down right to the municipalities that have the manufacturing plants?
Well, that's music to my ears, because that's how we're going to succeed as a country. Because if we, manufacturing is a pillar of our economy. I mean, you represent members, which are what, 10% of the GDP. But we know that if we want to be competitive for the future, we need, AI, quantum, yeah, sure, digital. This is all good, but we need people and the right skills with the right people to be able to deliver. So I'm quite happy to engage with you. If you give me a few more days, Dennis, to engage with you and others to make sure that we continue in the journey that we have already started to make sure we are the most competitive place in the world for manufacturing.
So I'm going to ask you one last question that's come in while we were talking from our members, and I know you're a good sport. So it said, so what the question is this: we have great access to free trade agreements, but there's so much more to do, and a big part of what we need to do is scale up our manufacturers and better connect them so that we can take advantage of this, because we've seen our share of exports actually decline over a number of years across, relative to our competitors. But how do we help get companies exporting more, to your point, so that we are more competitive and we get a higher share of that total global share?
Well, I think we need to turbo boost our exports. As a former trade minister, as the one who put the signature on the TPP, you would certainly appreciate that. For me, when we came into office, first of all was CETA. As you will remember, we said we need to give preferential market access to Canadian business to the largest consumer market in the world, which is the European Union, 500 million consumers, more or less. And that was strategic, because oftentimes people say Canada is the most European country outside of Europe. And we need to double down to make sure we take full advantage. Real big competitive advantage. The United States doesn't have that, and many other countries don't have that. We have that. Then we did, obviously, the new free trade with the United States and Mexico, CUSMA, providing stability, predictability. But one that I'm particularly proud is when we look east, because we, often say that demography is destiny. You just look at countries with huge demography, huge young population, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Japan. To name one where we did not have a bilateral free trade agreement for decades. I mean, this has been escaping Canada for decades. Now with the CPTPP, as we call it, we have market access to about 500 million consumers. All that to say that we have preferential market access now to more than 1.5 billion consumers, the only G7 country with a free market access to all other G7 countries. Now we need to take advantage. How do we do that? Obviously, I'm a big believer in the trade commissioners. I think the trade commissioners are great. They can help our small and medium-sized businesses. You said it, Dennis, the big multinational, they know how to get to these markets. The trade commissioners are there to help. I believe in trade mission. We used to do these Team Canada, a trade mission, which was providing a boost. Now, COVID was challenging in terms of having large group of people travel. But I think as we are doing that another way, I've seen Minister Ng doing virtual trade mission. And the second thing I think is promoting Canada's brand. I think there's never been a better time to have Canada as a brand. It stands for predictability, for quality, for traceability. I saw it when I was Foreign Affairs Minister. I had countries calling and saying, Minister, can we rely on you for food? Can we rely on you for medicine? I think that in the new green economy, we could be becoming the green supplier of choice to the world, as ESG is becoming predominant in how people are looking. And I've seen people trying to green their supply chain. When we invested, for example, in green aluminum, green steel, biomanufacturing, the battery ecosystem we're going to build, the EV vehicle, the parts manufacturer. I think, honestly, if I was not in politics, I would certainly be with your members to be all over the place, promoting that. And we'll do it together, because I think that now is the time to make sure that, if I had to start a business, I'd certainly be establishing in Canada, look at green technologies, look at how I can help a company green their supply chain and go to the global markets, because we have a competitive advantage like no other country in the world. And that's why I wish that, Dennis, we continue together, because on my side and your side and with your members, there's an opportunity which is big for manufacturers now.
Well, thank you, Minister. And it is a team sport. At the end of the day, if we're going to make it, we have to work together. And we appreciate your comments and suggestions. I'll give you if you want to make a couple last comments before I let you go, that would be fine with us if our members are all tuned in. So I'll leave the last word to you before I close up for housekeeping.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think the choice ahead of us is, like I said, strong with our accomplishment, but with a very clear vision. And I think you've seen vision in action. We've done it in the biomanufacturing sector. I think we have the capabilities, the people, the talent to turn things around, to attract investment. We have the vision for the future, greening the economy and becoming the supplier of choice to the world. You talk about our trade agreements and how we can position that. And one of the things we need to challenge together is skills, is the people. How can we make sure we have that? And looking not only 2-3 years ahead, but 20-30 years ahead. And I've never been more confident than I'm now that we have all the bases to do that. The 2% challenge I must say, because I think we have demonstrated that when we pull in one direction, nothing is impossible. Like I said, when I started, people said, Minister, biomanufacturing, 40 years of decline, we turned that around. When we had the aerospace, people said, Minister, things are tough. We turned that around. We made strategic investment. And every time we've been making sure that these investments would generate R&D dollars in Canada, made in Canada solution, and would include small and medium-sized businesses. Because after all, we need to lift all manufacturers when we get these anchor investments. So my commitment to you, Dennis, and to your team and all your members is to work together. I had the privilege to serve as trade minister and now as industry minister. So certainly we know the way ahead, and we hope to be able to continue together.
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. And we, of course, wish you success in your own riding, Saint-Maurice Champlain. So I wish you success there, because that's the most important step first. And
that's where it starts.
That's where it begins. So thank you for your time today. I'll let you go. And we're just about to wrap up for our members across Canada. Today, we were able to have Mr. Brian Massey. We had Mr. Pierre Poilievre, and of course, Mr. Francois-Philippe Champagne. Thank you all of you for attending. We hope we found this informative. Last pitch, and I know your colleague is looking forward to this, Minister. We have a session in French on Wednesday at noon, and on that day, Minister Joly will represent the Liberal Party, so we look forward to that. You can register on our website. Anyway, we'll continue to work on your behalf. Thank you all for your time today. Our future, our children's future depends on our success in developing this industry. So we wish our speakers good luck and wish everyone a good day. Bonne journée.
Merci. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.